Okay, so we have our first Renaissance structure. Okay, we won't have too many strictly Renaissance churches. I think this might even be the only church. Technically speaking, it's not actually even a church. It's a chapel, which means it does have the sacrament of or it has the Eucharist in it. If you don't understand what I mean by that, basically it has the tabernacle, kind of the container where the Eucharist is kept. So the Eucharist being the body and blood of Christ, or the body of Christ at least. This original function was, it was a chapter house. What's a chapter house? It's a meeting place for priests. Okay, so it was part of a whole a basilica of Santa Croce, right? And there were a lot of priests who were part of this facility, and so this is where they would come to meet. All right. So, as I said, it's our first Renaissance piece, our first Renaissance building. And if we look at it, what do we notice? I see columns, right, with Corinthian capitals. I see arches. I see a dome up here. It looks like there might be an opening to that dome, right, which would be an oculus. I see squares and rectangles, or rectangular looking shapes here at the top. I see an entablature. So I see a lot of, a pediment here. Actually, this is technically a pediment. It's actually technically a tympanum. But we have a lot of things that remind us, of course, of classical Greece and classical Rome. Well, what's the big deal about that? Because it's the Renaissance, guys. All right. So we're going to see a lot of things that look very much like classical Greece and classical Rome. And with that comes an emphasis on order, mathematics, rationality. Okay, all of those things, especially that we talked about with respect to Greece, that the Romans took, we're going to see in our Renaissance structures, especially this sacred structure, the sacred church, right? Or chapel, at least. Okay, so we can see here's our Pazzi Chapel. We compare them with Roman temples, right? So this is a circular Roman temple, but we can see it looks very similar, right? It's clearly inspired by Roman temples specifically, right? This is the Renaissance. That makes sense. All right. So this is the interior, right? We are not, the elements in the interior. There's going to be specific things that I point out, but we're really mostly looking at the Pazzi Chapel because it is such a perfect example of our first of the movement into the Renaissance. And we're going to contrast that with, what we saw of the Gothic period. We have a 12-ribbed hemispherical dome. What does that mean? Well, we can see it on the side here. This is the dome, right? I see 1, 2, 3, 4. We see these ribs going up, and obviously all around it will be 12. I also see some windows here on the side, which might remind you somewhat of Hagia Sophia, but primarily, Hagia Sophia, of course, is a Byzantine church. This is going to be a Renaissance church. It's going to be very different looking, right? And the dome is above a square base on the floor. So on the floor is a square shape, right? The dome goes over this basic square shape on the floor, right? And we have and on the side of this square shape, there are two, we can't see them very well here, but I promise you they're here. There are two barrel vaulted sections on each side of the square base of the building. So what it looks like to the eye initially when you come in, like, oh, this is a square, centrally planned building, actually ends up being not a square, centrally planned building. It's not a basilica, definitely not a basilica, but also not a centrally planned building. So it looks initially like a square, but it's not. Ends up being more rectangular in shape. Okay. We also have a low bench that runs along the walls of the room. Well, why do they need benches? Because it was a place for meetings, right? And you'll also notice what we call, and I'll give you the word for that in just a second, Pietra, or the spelling of it, Pietra Serena, which is this greenish gray stone, right? I see pilasters here. This greenish gray stone that kind of outlines different shapes along the walls, along the plaster walls. Okay. So the emphasis here is on circles, squares, rectangles, and obviously we have, arches as well. But it's a very geometrically oriented, geometrically interested space. So what do we want to emphasize? So what do we see? So here's a view of the dome, right? So we can see it from above. We got the oculus in the middle. Those are the 12 ribs that I mentioned before. And you can see here's one barrel vault, or the beginning of a barrel vault, which goes up here, and the other barrel vault would go down that way. But this part is the square part below. It's very emphasis. The emphasis is on rationality, on mathematics, on the peacefulness that those two ideas bring about. Okay, so all right. Okay, so sorry, I had a bit of a pause there. So as we see, there's the spelling of Pietra Serena, right? Which of course means serene stone. So we can see it outlines these different shapes, right? And they also, so we can see the relationship between, here's the relationship between this arch and the dome. Here's the relationship between this pendentive and the dome and the arch. So we can understand how the shapes in the building work together more clearly. Well, why is that important? That's important because with Renaissance architecture, it appeals in part to the mind and to rationality. And so if we can see how the parts fit together more easily, if there's less kind of illusion, and we see how the parts fit together more easily, that appeals to the mind, and that we can knowing that we can understand things, right? Similarly, on the floor, we can see like the pavement stones. We have some outlining here in white. So we have a big square pavement stone, another one here. And then on the side, we have the rectangular pavement stones. And again, they're demarcated in the white stones. And so that, the square pavement stones relate to the square shape, and the rectangular pavement stones relate to the rectangular shape above the barrel vaults, right? Okay. So we want to think about the other churches that we've looked at. And now I know technically this is not a church, but it's a chapel, it's a sacred space. In what ways is it different than what we've looked at in terms of Christian churches? And then there are, like, for Santa Sabina, you might say, well, it kind of reminds me of Santa Sabina, and it should, because Santa Sabina was at the very, very, late antique Europe, kind of the dregs of the Roman greatness of the Roman Empire. And so it looks more Roman. And so does this, of course. So here is our interior. Look at the interior of a Gothic church. Now, this isn't a Gothic church that we have, but it's Gothic. See how different it is, right? So you want to think about words to describe this, right, as opposed to this, right? So cerebral for our Renaissance, rational, serene, right? Very different from Gothic. So there is a loggia on the exterior. A loggia basically is a covered, kind of like a covered porch. Usually it's on the outside. There's a loggia, which should maybe remind you of, parts of maybe the Forum of Trajan, or excuse me, I'm drawing a blank, or the Athenian Agora. But this outside area, why would a covered porch be particularly important in Italy? Well, it's hot in Italy, right? So anyway, the loggia was added on after Brunelleschi's death. But we can see we have a barrel vault, we have a dome in the loggia, I have pendentives. All right. So when you're looking at, so here's a floor plan of Pazzi Chapel. So there's the square space I was talking about, right? And there are the rectangular spaces that I was mentioning, right? So the barrel vaults over here, right? And here is the square space. Okay. So it doesn't actually a perfectly centrally planned space, but it feels like it initially when you come in. Okay. So you should be reminded, of course, of the Pantheon, right? We got a dome with an oculus right in the middle. There we go. That should speak Pantheon. You should not be thinking, oh, but Hagia Sophia also has a dome, you know. Yes, but it does not feel anything like Hagia Sophia when you walk into it. It feels far more like the Pantheon. Why? Pantheon is Roman. This is Renaissance church. There we go, right? I've already mentioned the Pietra Serena. There are these roundels, again, round shapes with decoration. We have glazed images on them. Okay, so that's all I have for you. You should watch the Khan Academy video and then complete the quiz. Thank you.